And now I would like to invite Henrik Olsson on stage, who is the blockchain lead at PwC Sweden. And maybe you say some words about yourself prior to me inviting the third panelist.
Excellent. Can everybody hear me? So hi, yeah. So management consulting, or management consultant, predominantly focused on advisory services related to either ICOs or anything around blockchain, how to create them, where they could be vulnerable in terms of cybersecurity, etc. So I work with our global network, where we've got presence in Hong Kong, Singapore, Zug in the crypto valley, etc. So we have lots of collaborations in terms of, you can have almost incorporate your business here, but set it up somewhere else, and essentially we can help you wherever you want to go.
And Stig Johansson.
Do you want us to sit down, or?
Yeah.
Excellent.
The head of innovation at FI, the Sweden Financial Supervisory Authority, and I'm very happy to get you on the stage, and maybe you give also a little bit further background to yourself.
Well, thank you for having me. As you said, I'm the head of innovation center at the Swedish FSA, and I'm also a senior market conduct supervisor, so I do supervision mainly on the payment side, but also on new phenomena at the larger scale. So very happy to be here.
Yeah, you're much welcome. And obviously, I would like to use the opportunity to ask you, can you basically fundamentally agree with the views we have built within the German Blockchain Association, which I just outlined, of the classification of tokens?
Well, on a broad level, I would say that we would be able to agree on that. But I mean, we have sort of the similar approach as BaFin has in Germany, that we currently do a case-by-case assessment of new phenomena. And the reason for it is that we don't want to front-run any potential EU harmonization. That might lead to a tougher regulation in Sweden, or it might lead to sort of a more looser, that might lead to sort of from a risk perspective and from a consumer protection perspective, to a sort of race to the bottom, so to say. So we're sort of very cautious on giving general assessment on what it might be, but we are more than happy to do it on a case-by-case basis.
And maybe important to know in that context, ESMA, the European body for financial supervisory, formed a group for the national regulators to discuss these token classification and token regulation topics more broadly. It will obviously take some time for such a big group to form an opinion that they are willing to publish. And that's currently the period of time where the national regulators are a little bit more careful not to step ahead too much. That's right. But unfortunately, we all must learn in that period of time as well. So I think everyone appreciates if you could share a little bit further, the case-by-case decisions you already took. Can you actually tell how many cases, how many inquiries did you already get?
Well, to be honest, there weren't really that many, which is sort of a surprise to us. We were expecting a lot more. The more traditional ones that we've done historically have been concerning the exchange or the selling of a cryptocurrency, sort of mainly Bitcoin, towards fiat currency, where we have sort of considered it to be probably a means for payment. And I do realize that we're very vague on this term, which means that a firm that has the ability to sell Bitcoins, for example, or to buy them from retail consumers would need to be registered with us as a financial institution, and they need to sort of follow AML compliance, but that's about it. But then again, we do also get, especially now, since we launched the Innovation Center, we have gotten more sort of broader questions into the Innovation Center. And in quite a few cases, we have determined that no, this is not within the regulatory framework. This is something else. This token is not a financial instrument. It will not result in, it is not the tokenization of a financial instrument, and it's not a token that becomes a financial instrument. So we have sort of decided, no, this is something else.
And do you actually issue kind of no action letters in those cases?
No, we don't issue no action letter, but we give them sort of a firm answer saying that no, you're outside the legal framework. The no action letters are for regulated entities, but so we sort of have but it's a similar meaning.
Yeah, has a similar meaning.
Yeah,
I
different
think so.
words, same context.
And maybe one further question. Did you ever step in against a token sale?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm not quite sure before I joined the FSA, but
I think in Germany it was quite interesting. It was published that BaFin stepped in 17 cases so far. They didn't say what precisely those cases were about and what they asked for and what they did, but it is public knowledge that there are already several cases.
we have had cases that companies have applied for authorization and not received it due to various reasons and circumstances, but not where we sort of stepped in and said that this is not okay to proceed with.
Yeah. And you wanted to say something as well.
I think in terms of us as advisors, when we have Sweden's blockchain startups or even international ones that approach me, I haven't heard about them being saying no, we shouldn't do an ICO or them being banned. Oftentimes, I mean, I think you were touching upon it, and it was also a conversation earlier on with the ministers from government, is that they will tend to move elsewhere where there is a little bit more clarity on structure, there is a little bit more of there's some more guidelines, there's been a few more ICOs launched, so that tends to kind of attract these types of things. So where I see a lot of the conversations I'm having with clients here is around, should we go to Zug, should we go to Switzerland, should we go to Hong Kong? That's essentially the route that you take. So you're no longer really, it's not Sweden per se that you're going after. You look at it more from a global perspective, which of course then creates further challenges when you want to talk about the tokens themselves and the tokenomics, because they can then be treated differently, country to country, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, which is of course something that adds a lot of complexity to the way that you set up and structure your company.
So what would your general advice look like with regard to those questions of location?
I mean, I think there's, if we want to simplify it, we typically look at three things, like the way that your business is being set up and run. So for example, you talked about protection laws against you as an individual. If you're dealing with payments, of course you have to abide with payment schemes, etc. You have to think about that. I think there's the whole legal side to it. You have to pay tax, you have to be registered, you have to go through all this. Well, that could be different country to country. And then the third thing is essentially around the technical sides. We talked a little bit about GDPR, we talked about not cyber law, but how do you deal with identity, know your customer, AML. So I think you have to look at all those three perimeters, so business, legal, technical, regardless of where you're setting up, where you're domicile, and maybe where you're doing business. I think you have to look at it from those three perspectives.
And I always like to, that's all completely true. I always like to add, because that's a question that we get in each and any case. First of all, I would always recommend to set up your operating company where you actually operate it. Because to artificially move it to another jurisdiction comes at certain costs. Costs for service providers in that jurisdiction, and typically the tax-friendlier and regulation-friendlier jurisdictions are those where those service providers are quite expensive. And then, it always counts where the decisions are taken. You need to be prepared that you need to fly for any important decision over into that jurisdictions in order to avoid involuntarily to move the location back to where you're actually resident.
But I think what you should also think about is that we are operating at a bigger and very global market. I know that's very cliche to say, but if you look at startups like Revolut or TransferWise, both incorporated out of the Baltic states, I believe they're incorporated in Latvia or even Estonia, which has got very, I would say, very digital-friendly laws and regulations, but they operate under a banking license out of the UK, right? So they borrow that. So I think we're seeing more and more complex corporate structures, without me being a legal specialist, but I think that you have to consider that when you set up your business, and that's a little bit of a separate track from blockchain, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So maybe you can share a little bit what projects you're working on an abstract basis, what do you see a general trend for blockchain projects in Sweden?
Well, from our side, I think that we have sort of tried now to change the view of the market. We try to be more open. Historically, we have been an authority, to a certain extent we still are, to be honest, an authority that's quite good at saying no. We have to sort of change that approach. In some cases, we will still say no, but we have to explain why. And we have to also be more open for a dialogue, which means that we would sort of be more than happy to sort of sit down, discuss the phenomena that they're trying to build, and determine what it actually is. There isn't anything sort of required from our side of doing that dialogue apart from the sort of description and the information regarding innovation. So currently we're seeing it on the sort of more bigger scale, like Johansson explained that Nasdaq's doing a lot of things. So we're seeing a lot of initiatives from the big banks, but also from small startups. So I hope that during this year that the culture will change in Sweden. We also want to point out that we have a different assignment from our government than other authorities have. Our assignment is quite similar to ones in Germany that BaFin have, and that is that we do not have a competition mandate, so we have to be sort of neutral. Whereas, for example, the FCA in the UK have a mandate, and it's part of their assignment to actually increase competition on the market. So, but given the mandate that we have, we still want to enhance consumer protection and ensure a well-functioning market. And that dialogue with companies that are now considering maybe doing an ICO in Sweden, or maybe having other issues or challenges in the regulatory context, that we will be more than happy to help with that. And we also want to be able to offer, maybe after the summer and the beginning of the fall, some sort of more simplified Q&As on frequently asked questions towards us, especially in terms of this sort of crypto space, because we do get a lot of sort of common questions coming in, where without giving sort of without setting the standards, because as I said, we don't want to front run the European banking authorities, but still we can sort of give more clarity to the market.
Yeah, I think that would be brilliant, actually. Yeah, very helpful and appreciated, I guess, also by the advisors in that space, right? So what trends do you see?
I mean, I think we've, I just recently moved back to Sweden from the US, where I spent 5 years, where a lot of the focus, of course, has been on the financial markets, capital market side, trades, exchanges. And I think where I'm starting to see the more and more the trend go is on, looking at open source, open networks, collaborations, thinking around that, where I think tokenization could have a really, really big role in how you can open up and network and work better together. But where we're probably seeing, the majority of the shift is where actually they are non-regular. Today, the way that we trade in certain aspects in a non-regulated, environment where this could be trade finance, trade of information, this technology is slowly starting to move in. So, for example, in supply chains, we're starting to see a lot of use cases, lots of consortia, everything from food tracking to diamond tracking to, you name it, like old value chain, old supply chains that have been operating for 100, 200 years without real change. And there's been very strong centralized players that have been, they've been collaborating with intermediaries, but they've taken out a big cut. I mean, just look at, Spotify, right? They're not too far from a, decentralized music service, but yes, they are a centralized database where you go for music and you subscribe to it. And they have acquired blockchain-based technology to help them with the rights and how they pay out to the different parties in their network. So I think that we're starting very much to see a shift where you have Spotify moments in different industries. The diamond industry being one, food industry being one, the forest industry, trade finance, another one, like when you take containers across the ocean. That's a very expensive, very inefficient process of tracking, etc. So I think those are some of the areas, and also identity, which is a big one.
And do you actually see that those new platforms will be built differently to what we, saw so far from the typical Silicon Valley style of building those platforms?
I mean, what we're seeing is It's almost like when you saw Facebook, right? When it started off, it was predominantly for doing status updates, adding friends, and extending your network. And maybe you started to share a picture, and then you started with check-in, and it evolved. It started to include more and more microservices. I think we're going to see similar things here, where we, with this distributed economy, where the network effect, it's going to be very uncertain where it heads off. So I think I don't know if it's going to be Silicon Valley driving it, but I definitely think that this is definitely going to be the age of platforms, platform economies, where smart engineers will construct things around education that just goes directly to the consumer to use. That's going to, you don't have to go to EF or the big universities or whatever. It's going to be more of a decentralized solution whereby you can come and innovate. Similar to what I believe was Carewine that was talking here about their decentralized platform for healthcare. I think we're going to see a number of those where others will be allowed to innovate, come with products, come with new services, and it's going to be a completely different dynamic.
Yeah, that's what we actually see in Germany also a lot. That those platforms are built in a way that they are not owned by one certain company anymore. I think that's the most differentiating factor of those platforms, and a lot of those are built in non-profit entities, and they will decide about like the protocol layer, and then any sort of for-profit entity can build up applications on a paid basis on top of that. But I always like to call it infrastructure, right? The infrastructure, the digital infrastructure should be built on a non-profit basis, not owned by any single entity. Yeah, that's what we're seeing as well.
Yep.
All right, so maybe we open this up to questions, if any. Do we have a microphone for?
Maybe I can borrow you. I had some questions about the ownership of some either tokens of cryptocurrency, because I have a problem with Skatteverket. Skatteverket is a tax authorization in Sweden.
What? Yep.
It's because currently it's half anonymous. And for example, I can give an example. So I sell some cryptocurrency for my relatives in China, and in China there is no capital gain tax. So that's it's cross-border. And then the Skatteverket asked me, and you must provide a proof that it belongs to them. And then the ownership of the cryptocurrency itself must be validated. It's unlike today's financial system. You will have the stocks or the bonds or anything registered in the regulated exchange. Then the ownership is very clear.
Ooh.
Anyone who can answer
No,
that tax?
I can't answer it, unfortunately. I do understand the complexity, but
So I know that I'm not a tax
This is more,
declaration
consultants.
specialist, but I do know that I have colleagues that have helped people to provide the declaration of your taxes as it relates to cryptocurrency. So I don't know if I can help with your specific problem. I'm not a tax expert, but let's exchange cards and let's see if I can find somebody that can help you. Okay, right. In that, yeah, I can't provide you with a general answer.
Yeah, so can we actually, yeah, that would be great. I think those two questions, maybe I see the time run out, but those two we are taking
hello?
still.
Yeah, I have seen this kind of regulation or those kind of people. People are scared of those kind of regulation. It's hard for people to do the innovation. Example, I'm just saying this example, I want to ask that. If the company going to issue the token as a utility token, but later the company use the profit to buy back these tokens to make this token to more valuable, then people can sell this token in the exchange. How do you think this is legal or not legal? Can you answer this question? Do you understand?
From my perspective, actually, I would have no problem with, if you're buying back your own, products or services on the market to limit the offering.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not
have
sure,
share
but
buybacks.
I wouldn't see that as something that would reclassify anything.
no, it shouldn't change the.
I mean, the profit is that you just use the company profit to buy back that to make kind of the token that's valuable, like utility token value. Like, for instance, this is what the Binance, those kind of exchange utility token, is that legal in Europe or not? So that's my question. Sorry, I mean, this is...
Without giving a sort of a very sort of firm answer on it, I would guess yes, that is that would be legal. The valuation itself doesn't change the attributes of the token. So if a token were to go from being a utility token to a security token, it would require something else to change. But it's sort of hard to be specific on it. So, but my guess is that the answer would be that it would be yes, it would be legal.
Thank you.
We actually were thinking about such structures mainly for tax, from a tax perspective. So in one of my projects, we actually thought about implementing such a clause, and we were arguing that because you're not promising to buy back tokens to any certain person, you're not promising that you will buy back his or her token, but just that you're buying back on the market in general, that you nevertheless do not create a security-like equity or debt instrument. Yeah, but that's, you know, it's not confirmed by the regulators yet, but that was our view.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, because previously you said that it's a security if it passes the Howey test, and that's depending on if the instrument, if you do an ICO and you offer an instrument, if that instrument is sold as an investment, which would be the case here, if you sold an instrument and you said we're going to buy this back with the profits of the company, then that's the value of the token gets. There's a connection between the profits of the company. So from your perspective, I would have guessed that would be a security. And
but the Howey test is the US, right? I'm pretty sure that the US would look at this instrument as a security, but we were talking more about the European view.
Okay, so in Germany that's completely okay then to do that.
Well, I wouldn't give you like a certain opinion on that, because I would always recommend showing that structure to our local regulators before. But my personal opinion is that this element would not reclassify a utility token into a security token. Yes.
All right, that's very interesting.
My comment would be, if we plan to do it in Sweden, I would recommend that you put it in writing and you get a sort of firm answer from us that we would be happy to provide.
Okay, and you haven't had that type of question before, and you haven't made a decision yet. All right, very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to leave the stage. Thank you very much for listening.